FANTASIAN Neo Dimension has quite the history as a game, but despite that, it didn't have much fanfare at launch, and that's honestly a shame, because despite being a newly released title, it is absolutely dripping with the charm and heart that reminds me of the classic PlayStation 1 era of Final Fantasy. It has a fun and a unique combat system, an interesting world with some intriguing characters and some very interesting mysteries, and after going on this journey myself, I really want to talk about it here on my channel in a spoiler-free way. Talking about the aspects that I enjoyed, but also talking about some of the hurdles that I ran into and that you should probably keep in mind when deciding on whether or not to pick this game up. I would also like to thank Square Enix for providing me with a review code for the PlayStation 5 version of FANTASIAN though. I really appreciate this opportunity that I got. And if you enjoyed this video, a like or a comment or any type of support is greatly appreciated, as it can really help me out. But without further ado, let's talk about my experience with FANTASIAN Neo Dimension. I said earlier that FANTASIAN has quite the history, and that's because this game is the newest title from Hironobu Sakaguchi, also known as the father of Final Fantasy, featuring an OST composed by Nobuo Uematsu, the composer of many Final Fantasy titles. And these two legends came together to create FANTASIAN, which would originally release on the Apple Arcade, because of course, your Apple devices are the best place to play your JRPGs, I guess. This is why originally a lot of people who were into Final Fantasy or other JRPGs, aka the target audience, simply couldn't play the game. But from a business standpoint, I guess I also kind of understand why they made this decision. The studio behind the game, Mistwalker, is a smaller independent studio, and while that does give them heaps of creative freedom, it also makes the budget kind of tight, so I'm assuming it was either an Apple Arcade game or no game. So in April of 2021, they released FANTASIAN Part 1, and later in that year, in August, they released Part 2. You can kind of think of this as the equivalent of a Disc 1 and Disc 2. Mobile games simply tends to release in parts, even if it's most definitely not a live service game. And in the coming months and years, FANTASIAN built quite the reputation online. Yes, it was extremely niche, as maybe 10 people played it at most, but the game would come up surprisingly often in JRPG discussions, as everyone was curious about this new fantasy JRPG coming from the freaking Final Fantasy creators. For me though, it mostly stuck around in my mind because the protagonist really looks like he would fit right into a Nier game. But a few years later, the JRPG community actually won, as Square Enix would collaborate with Mistwalker, releasing FANTASIAN Neo Dimension, a single title containing both parts of the original release on all platforms. And this remaster came with some pretty major improvements and additions, most notably voice acting. Because even without playing the original title, I feel like it's pretty safe to say that this massively improved the presentation, and the presentation of this game is probably one of its biggest selling points. You can really see how much creativity is behind this title. It has the classic camera angles that we know and love, but instead of pre-rendered backgrounds, FANTASIAN makes use of real handcrafted diorama environments. This game has over 160 of these, by the way, and they were physically made by hand, only to then be digitally scanned or photographed, or I don't know, I'm not an expert, but these dioramas are the world of FANTASIAN, the worlds that you play around in, and it cannot be understated how beautifully charming this looks. Just walking around these towns, listening to the OST, at many times it made me stop and think like, God, how was this game stuck on the Apple Arcade for that long? It is so freaking charming that I couldn't help but smile as I was exploring this world. And on top of that, each and every area also feels really unique thanks to the different archetypes architecture, and thanks to the OST that gives each location its own flavor. And talking about the OST, I feel like that goes without saying, but it is genuinely incredible. There are so many beautiful pieces of music here, especially with how some of these tracks play into the world and the story itself. But while there are many moments where the music adds to the experience, sadly there are also some moments where it could have been used a lot better. There would often be some character moments that were quite striking to me, but instead of playing the theme of said character, for example, they would just be playing the theme of the world area that they're in, which then feels awkward and very out of place, lessening the impact of an otherwise great moment. And this awkwardness also carries through in some of the visual aspects. The backgrounds are absolutely beautiful, and in motion this game looks great, but whenever the camera gives us a close-up of a character during a story moment, it gets pretty noticeable that this was originally still a mobile title, as the character models and their animations leave a bit to be desired at times. So this, combined with those music choices, would sometimes create moments where I wasn't as emotionally impacted by a scene as I probably should have been. But now that I mentioned those story moments, let's move on to the narrative, which does start off quite slow and simple if I'm being honest. I would use the word generic, but I feel like that would paint it too negatively, because despite missing that hook, so to say, the opening hours of the game are definitely not bad. We start with an introduction to our main character Leo, who is suffering from memory loss, and after the opening mission we find ourselves in our hometown, where we witness the Bacteria invasion. The world of Fantasian exists out of multiple dimensions, and while we humans live in the human realm, there is another dimension layered on top of ours, which is known as the machine realm, with the Bacteria invasion being a virus from that realm bleeding into ours. This machine virus is being shown as a literal blight upon the world. In some towns the effects are still being contained, but at other places the world has become completely inhabitable. It's an infection that robs humanity of their emotions and their lives upon exposure to it. And this entire situation serves as a backdrop for the story, and stopping this plague will become our eventual goal. But right now, in the beginning of the game, we are focused on our main character, as we're trying to find out more about his past. The main character does not remember anything, but it also becomes very clear that his memories of his past and his parents are connected to the Bacteria itself, and regaining these memories might bring us closer to helping the world. And thankfully we're also not aimlessly wandering around trying to hopefully remember some stuff, because while Leo's dad himself might not be around anymore, he does have some workshops that are spread out all across the realm, and by visiting these workshops again, Leo hopes that can maybe trigger something in his memories. Before the events of the game, his dad also gave him a dimension device, which plays into the gameplay by delaying random encounters, but I'll talk about that aspect more during the gameplay section. I just wanted to mention it now because while it is a gameplay mechanic, it also serves a role in the story, and it tells us quite a bit about Leo's father. This guy casually created a dimensional machine, so those workshops could end up being pretty useful. And we're not just going on this journey alone either, as we meet up with Kina, who wants to help us, but she also wants to see the world and find her destiny. Similarly to Leo, her past is also quite a bit of a mystery. She's living with a fortune teller from the village who adopted her, but her real parents are not known to her. She's also surprisingly capable in the magical arts, and she has this guardian spirit that will come out to protect her in the crucial moments. And that's how the story starts, with Kina and Leo trying to uncover the past to save the present. And while this journey does start off with just the two of them, of course we're gonna be meeting many other characters on the journey. Some of them will be joining our party as soon as we meet them, and others are outsiders that are doing their own thing, but we run into them regularly during our travels. And then some others start off as those outsiders, only to join our party much later in the story. And I really enjoy that aspect. A lot of the late game party members have always been active forces in the narrative, so when the time comes, they don't just appear out of nowhere. From before they joined us, we've already been building relationships to them, and then when the time finally comes is when we fully get to know them and when we finally uncover their backstory. backstories. And these backstories were some of my highlights in this game that were made even stronger thanks to the way that they were presented, where we get some artwork in the background and beautiful music that perfectly fits every scene. Moments like these actually appear quite regularly as the story is very character driven, and that's also something that I'm personally a big fan of. In the early game especially, these storybooks kind of set the tone. It feels like a pretty cozy JRPG where you're just on this grand adventure. You're meeting all of these different people, visiting these different towns, you're joking around with your party members, there's even a little romantic rivalry going on between Cheryl and Kina as they're both crushing on Leo. And when even more party members join, the dynamics just keep expanding as everyone finds someone here that they can have some friendly banter with, giving a real found family vibe. But of course, the looming threat of the bacteria is always there, and while we are on this fun adventure, there's always a hint of something grander. While the game took quite a while to get me hooked into the story, the fun character vibes did make it pretty enjoyable during that slow start. But as we keep progressing further, we get some pretty great twists and the narrative really gets going as we approach the beginning of part 2. The game might have started simple, but it's not staying there, as the narrative focus is starting to shift towards the gods and the creation of all of these dimensions and realms. Usually for spoiler-free reviews like this one, I would only give my general thoughts on the story and an initial setup, meaning that I would probably wrap it up around this point. But for Fantasian, that doesn't really work. I won't go into narrative details, obviously this is still a spoiler-free review, but this game completely changes for the second half, the second part, and I feel like that's really important to mention, just so you know whether or not this game will be something you enjoy. And this shift also isn't only present in the story, it's also reflected in the gameplay and in its structure, because where the game used to be quite linear, part 2 throws all of that out of the window and you can go through the rest of the story in any order you want. Of course, there is some slight guidance because every area has a set difficulty, but these recommended levels never felt quite right. Some quests will branch into 3 new ones, and some other quests will be completely hidden. If you're not using a guide, there is no clear order to any of this. Hell, you can even miss some pretty major sections of part 2, including party members if you're not being careful. This shift obviously affects much of the game, but let's tackle what this means for the narrative first. As soon as you start part 2, you'll immediately have access to a few main quests. Some of these are purely narrative driven as they're focused on the dimensions, the bacteria, and other quests will be purely character driven. Everyone gets their own quest line that's focused on them individually, and I really enjoyed these quests. Some characters simply get fleshed out a bit more as we maybe delve even deeper into their backstory, but for others they get a pretty major plot twist that recontextualizes their arcs. But sadly, one element that I always really enjoyed in Fantasian, the character interactions and dynamics, it kind of went missing in part 2 as a result of this open structure. It's understandable because you can do everything in any order. My party might look or feel drastically different during a certain quest compared to your party. Maybe Cheryl had some more character development, maybe Kina is there, maybe Kina is not there. Regardless of any of that, the quest needs to work, which causes a lot of these characters to simply not talk at all if they're not the main focus. In part 1, the entire story was linear, so every single character could contribute at any given time. Any character can jump into any conversation and creates that fun chemistry that held this party together. The progression of every character and of the main story used to be set in stone, and because of that, in every single quest you could see the impact of the events that happened before it. This then also strengthens that development, as it was allowed to shine in these small conversations, in the aftermath. A certain character's arc might have ended 5 quests ago, but you can still feel the impact of that arc, because of the small talk that they will engage in while someone else's quest is ongoing. But here, that is simply not a thing anymore. All of these characters and their quests are still written very well, don't get me wrong. They contain some of my favorite moments for these these individual characters and some of my favorite moments in the entire game. But part 2 feels a lot more segmented, limited, and the entire group dynamic is severely lacking until basically the very end. Because thankfully the ending section is dynamic, and depending on your choices and your order of events, you will get different dialogue. But this is only the case in the ending, it's not the case for 90% of part 2, let's say. Some characters that had amazing chemistry in part 1 simply never talk to each other in part 2 until the very end of the game, and that honestly really sucks. I genuinely feel like this game would have been a lot stronger if they kept that linear structure, because again, part 2 has some incredible moments, but the problem is that all of those incredible moments kind of happen in a vacuum. The strengths here simply come from a very different place, that being the individual characters, the world, and the main narrative. Because the hints of the early game with Fam and that guardian spirit that I mentioned are really starting to pay off, and all of those plot points that have been in the background are now finally getting a spotlight. And while I do really like where a lot of this goes, I also kind of feel like some of it didn't reach the heights that it could, and in some ways, especially in terms of the main villain, I was kind of let down. Not because it was bad, but I just kind of expected a little bit more. Maybe it's because of all of the setup that was done throughout part 1 and part 2, or maybe it's because when you compare the main villain of Fantasian to some other villains from the same writers, they just aren't on the same level. They have some interesting moments, the backstory did hook me and did intrigue me, but it was more the grander mythology surrounding the gods and surrounding the antagonists that got me intrigued, not the antagonist himself. I was kind of missing an emotional core, an emotional connection to him, I guess is the best way that I can say it. But as I briefly mentioned earlier, the ending itself is quite strong. I like how the narrative ties everything together, and I really like that all of the individual character arcs have a very satisfying conclusion. But because of the lack of character interactions in part 2, some relationship outcomes and the development of some relationships didn't really feel earned in the end. And I'm also not really a fan with how they resolved the little love triangle between Cheryl, Kina, and Leo. But I don't want to spoil it here, I just wanted to give my general thoughts on the ending, which is basically strong but also flawed, which I guess applies to the story as a whole when looking back on both my positive and negative points. But I feel like with that we talked enough about the narrative, so let's tackle the gameplay. And if you're familiar with turn-based JRPGs, you will very much know what to expect here. But that's far from a bad thing. Fantasian knows what it is, it knows what the fans of this genre want, and it's damn good at providing that. But in saying that, Fantasian's combat system does come with quite the twist. That being that you can aim all of your attacks in real time. You select your attack or skill, and depending on the type, you can aim it in certain ways. Some attacks are a straight line and it will damage the first enemy it touches, but if your attack has a piercing effect, the attack won't stop at that first enemy, as it will do damage to everything in its path. Other attacks are AoEs, and magic attacks can be curved, allowing you to hit enemies at a precise angle. It's honestly quite satisfying to line up the perfect attack and see how many enemies you can hit in one go. And as the game progresses, they'll add even more to this real-time element. Some enemies, for example, will have some floating objects orbiting them, in which case you need to time your attacks to go between these objects, which is a really cool concept, even if I personally had some trouble figuring out the timing and the hitboxes. I don't know, it was just kind of hard to estimate when the game wants you to attack. My personal skill issues aside though, as you can already see, the game gets quite creative with this combat system, and that creativity is dialed up to 11 for the boss fights, as they all have certain gimmicks that you need to figure out and exploit. And these are very, very fun to engage in. And something that might seem kind of unremarkable at first, but ended up being one of the best best mechanics in the game for me is the instant swapping of party members in combat. Every single party member plays their own unique role, and depending on the situation, you're gonna want to switch these out quite often. So with the press of a button, you can instantly swap them out for a backup character. Is the boss maybe charging up a big attack? Oh, simple, just take out all your DPSs, put in all your tanks, buff your defense, debuff their attack, put up your guard, and maybe you'll even hit a counter. And if the boss goes in a cooldown state afterwards, just get rid of your tanks, get rid of your support units, and put in all of your DPSs for a full frontal attack. Every character is useful, and I loved that, especially because buffs and debuffs stay applied even after switching out a character. In the endgame, I had Cheryl built to be sort of a nuke DPS, meaning that whenever I had time, I would put her in an active slot and apply as many buffs as I could, and then I would put her back on the backline as a backup party member. I would bide my time, and whenever there was an opening, I would swap her in again. She can deal some insane damage in a single turn, and then I would swap her out again for support or a tank or whatever I needed at the time. But you might have a completely different strategy, because the game gives you so many options, with different armor sets, accessories, weapons, and gems, adding even more to this. But even if it gives you all of these options, the game never really got overwhelming, which is thanks to the way that the progression expands step by step. As we all know by now, Fantasian has two parts, and in part 1, the progression is mostly based on your equipment, by buying or finding weapons and gear. And this system is generally pretty solid. It offers a lot of variety, and it feels like your equipment actually matters, as I would change around my gear pretty often to prepare for certain battles. But in part 2, the game greatly expands on this, as we get introduced to tension skills, weapon and armor upgrades, and growth maps. Tension skills are basically your ultimate attacks. Every character has a different one that fits their playstyle, but they all share the same progression bar, which charges during combat. So you gotta choose which one fits your situation best. But the main addition in part 2, without a doubt, is the growth map, which is a massive skill tree unique to each character. You can unlock new skills, upgrade your tension, buff your existing skills, and more. It's honestly a really strong skill tree that opens the game up to an insane amount, and it is absolutely crazy that you only unlock this like 20-25 hours into the story, if not more. And I honestly really like this. They're slowly opening up the progression over the course of the game, and thanks to this, it avoids being overwhelming and it keeps the combat fresh. There is a very big drawback to the growth map though, because a lot of branches of the skill tree will be sealed, and the only way to unlock those skills is to then unseal the branch. And to do that, you need a specific item that you can find out in the world. And while this is a really cool concept to give the exploration some worthwhile rewards, in reality, I don't really like how it was handled, because these items can be anywhere, in any chest or in any random item pickup. And this especially sucks because a lot of chests are locked and you never know what's inside of them. Is it gonna be money, a potion, a shitty piece of gear, a good piece of gear, or is it gonna be the item that unlocks an incredibly powerful skill? You won't know until you use a key. Don't have a key? Well, sucks to be you, I guess. Time to grind random encounters in the hope that they drop one. And then you need to pray that if you eventually open the chest, that there was something good inside of it. And now that I mentioned the word grind, let's talk about that, shall we? Starting with the dimension mechanic. This is the Fantasian twist on random encounters. Activate your dimension machine that I mentioned earlier in the story section, and whenever you would normally run into an encounter, the monsters of that encounter will now simply get stored into this pocket dimension. And when it reaches a certain amount of monsters, you have to fight all of them in one big encounter. This dimension then fills up, and as soon as it reaches a certain amount of monsters, you have to fight every single monster that you collected in one big random encounter. And in the early game, this is absolutely incredible, as it gives you a lot more time between random encounters, making it a lot less tedious, and every single encounter also feels more rewarding and more worthwhile. You get more XP, more items, more money, and because you're fighting these big groups of enemies, it's also so much more satisfying, because it's in these encounters that the combat system is at its best. best. But as the game progresses, we start to see some issues with this system, because the further we get into the main story, the longer these dimension battles will take. I kid you not that at some point these battles will take you an average time of 20 to 25 minutes, and I feel like the encounter rate in the later areas is also a lot higher, as my dimension would fill up every 10 to 15 minutes. I was constantly dreading the fact that I was collecting these monsters. I was dreading that bar at the top left. The exploration went from me happily exploring to me trying to make it to my destination as soon as possible, because I did not want to enter that dimension and fight 50 enemies for what felt like the 50th time. And this absolutely killed the pacing in terms of the gameplay, especially because these aren't always tiny mobs. You can run into some pretty tanky enemies which then get stored, so you have to fight all of them at once, and it's kind of terrible. When you just want to explore, or when you're backtracking because you find the key, or because you're solving a puzzle or doing a side quest, you will just randomly get flung into this massive battle that you cannot escape from. And while this on its own already sounds pretty bad, maybe you're thinking like, well, yeah, it's a bit grindy, but at least you're getting money and XP. You're progressing your character, so it's not like you're wasting your time or anything. Well, that's only partly true, because let me tell you something about a little mechanic that gets introduced around the time that you reach level 35. A little mechanic called EXP scaling. And this mechanic causes you to only get XP from defeating enemies that are a higher level than the active party members. So if you're, let's say, level 40 and you defeat a level 39 enemy, you will not gain any XP. I mean, you do gain XP, you gain like 5 or something, but it takes like 100,000 to level up, let's say, so it might as well be 0. So for the rest of the game, it basically goes like this. You enter a new area, you do 1 or 2 dimension battles, you level up. Now you are the same as 9 out of 10 monsters in this area. So for the rest of your time here, every single battle is basically a waste of time. You get some money, yeah, but in the end game, I had millions and millions of money. I had 999 potions, I had like hundreds of Phoenix Downs, and my friends thought it was really funny that I was in the final boss and I had like 30 elixirs or something. Like, I was never gonna run out of items, I was never gonna run out of money, so these battles didn't really give me anything. And you run into these situations quite regularly, because maybe you just unlocked a new side quest, and that side quest has an objective in an older area. Or maybe it's even a main quest. Remember, part 2 is completely open, so you could be level 50 only to find a mandatory quest that's level 40. Well, that means to go back to an entire area, if not multiple areas, where you are over-leveled, meaning that you will not gain anything. And this also counts for bosses, by the way, and some of these bosses do not mess around. Even if you're over-leveled, this game is very challenging, so get ready to get your balls busted in a 45-minute battle, and when you finally defeat the boss, you get greeted by absolutely nothing. The fight itself might have been fun, the fight itself might have been really satisfying, but then you get to that result screen and it made me feel miserable. And this isn't simply, oh, the number isn't going up. The progression just stops at a certain point outside of the occasional gear upgrade, because no EXP means no levels, and no levels means no growth map skill points. In the late game, every single dungeon just felt like it was wasting my time, because after the first 2 encounters that I ran into in the very first room, it was just pointless. And this game isn't short either, as it took me around 65 to 70 hours to beat it on normal difficulty, which by the way is the easiest one. And while I did mention it as a side note earlier, the difficulty is something that I feel like I have to talk about in a bit more detail, as it's balanced kind of weirdly. In the early game, everything felt a bit easy, let's say the first 5 to 10% of your playtime, but that's also fine, as the game is in its tutorial phase and it's trying to get you used to the battle mechanics and system systems. But once you're past that tutorial phase, the game absolutely peaks in my opinion, and it will stay that way for quite a while, until the final quarter or something. But in that massive chunk, battles are really challenging, but are still rewarding. The bosses are hard, but also feel fair, and there's always a good balance between exploration and these battles. But then in the final quarter of the game or so, this game gets kind of diabolical. They constantly throw bosses at you that can casually party wipe you if you don't have your equipment optimized. And because of this difficulty jump, I felt under-leveled quite often. I felt like I wasn't supposed to be in this area yet, or maybe I was using the wrong gear or whatever, but more often than not, I was a higher level than the recommended one, with maxed out gear for that part of the story. And remember, you can't just leave that area and grind some levels somewhere. You can't just progress the area and grind while you're there. You need to overcome this challenge as it is presented to you. And while there's nothing wrong with that on paper, some of the most popular games out there are about overcoming a challenge, my issue lies with how inconsistent this difficulty is. Some other turn-based RPGs like SMT for example are extremely challenging, but in those games you know what you're getting into, and that difficulty is consistent throughout the game. But Fantasian starts like a very chill game, until you hit that difficulty spike where it becomes challenging but fair, and then you hit that second difficulty spike in the end, and then it becomes pretty hardcore, with some of the hardest bosses that I've fought in my gaming life, which created this really strange whiplash, because this simply wasn't what Fantasian had been for the past 50 hours. And because of that, I also went the extra mile and I did every single side quest that the game had to offer, because while these quests didn't give me XP, they did give me the ultimate weapons, and some of the optional bosses also unlocked some sections of the skill tree that were previously sealed. And I don't think I would have been able to beat this game without those skills or without those weapons. So while the rewards were worth it, it just didn't feel right. I wasn't engaging with the side content because it was interesting to me personally. I wanted to clear the story. The story was ramping up, but here I was grinding out optional dungeons, optional bosses, just to give me the slightest edge in the main story. And another thing that I didn't really like about this is that a lot of these optional super bosses aren't even unique enemies. Instead, they're reused and buffed story encounters. So even the fun figure out the gimmick part of the battle was missing here. And remember, during all of this side questing, the dimension bar was still filling up and actively wasting my time in between all of this. To be fair though, in the very late game, it does give you a way to reset the dimension random encounters bar by going to a specific location and paying a certain amount of money. But this was also kind of a strange implementation and it felt kind of tedious. While you're trying to clear these side quests as you're exploring the world, you're constantly watching that bar fill up, and as soon as it does, no matter where you are, if you don't want to get stuck in this encounter, you gotta teleport to this specific location. You gotta empty the device, pay the money, and teleport back. But you can't just teleport anywhere, you can only do that near specific save points. So here's hoping that whenever you teleported away to reset the bar, that you were near a teleport point, or you would have to backtrack quite a bit, filling up the bar once again. It's a welcome addition for sure, like it saved me a lot of hours, but it felt more like applying a bandage instead of actually fixing the issue at hand. I went on a bit of a negative rant just now, but I just want to be honest about the experience that I had and the issues that I ran into. I'm not lying when I say that I really liked this combat system. I thought it was a lot of fun to take down these massive groups of enemies, to figure out the gimmicks behind certain bosses, to swap out my party members constantly, to level up my skill tree to find together equipment. This game is really fun, but the endgame grind and the progression system genuinely just baffles me. There are some decisions in here that I'm like, how? I don't know, I did not enjoy it, and I want to be honest about that. But all of this did make the final boss extremely rewarding. After dealing with all of that grinding from the past 15 hours, this fight was fantastic. My party was so strong. I had the ultimate weapons, I had the nearly maxed out skill trees, and I felt like I was the appropriate level for this. I was kind of scared that I would be over-leveled, but that was not even close. There were a few close calls that had me terrified of losing hours of progress at 1 AM on a Wednesday night when I had work the day after. But all in all, it was such a good fight that really tested all of my strategies, that made me use every single party member that I collected throughout the story to their fullest. It was such a satisfying experience. So despite all of the things that I just complained about and ranted about, keep in mind that a lot of what I said won't be an issue for everyone. With this review, I really want to stress that while I maybe had some major issues with the later sections of this game, you might not feel the same way that I do. I talked about my experience, but I also tried talking about what the game is, what the game expects from you, what the mechanics are, how it's structured, so you can know what to expect and so you can make a decision. Yes, some decisions are genuinely just baffling in my opinion, like the EXP scaling, the length of random encounters, the reused bosses, the difficulty spikes, but maybe that's something that you're looking for, in which case, give the game some time and it will turn into that challenge that you are craving. There's even a massive, extremely difficult optional endgame dungeon that I personally didn't touch, but I know that some of you will absolutely adore that. But on the other hand, if you're someone who doesn't really enjoy grinding and min-maxing your equipment, maybe this game just isn't the perfect match for you. Don't let the first half deceive you, because even on the easiest difficulty, many levels above what's recommended, the late game will pose a major challenge. You will spend a lot of time grinding, and maybe that's just something you don't enjoy, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I've been going on about this for quite a while now, and I will definitely touch on this again in my conclusion to give a final verdict, but I have one more thing to talk about, that being the side quests, because as I've mentioned, I definitely spent my fair share of time doing these, and I've come to the conclusion that a lot of these are very, very strong, but there are also some that are some misses. The ones that I would call misses aren't the ones where you just have to collect a certain amount of items, but there are also some really, really great ones that had a very engaging storyline to them, as there are honestly some incredible character moments hidden away in these random side quests where I did not expect to find them. It's just a bit of a shame that there's no real way of knowing which is which beforehand, and the quest UI can also be a bit confusing as it's just this massive list of things that you gotta go through. The UI in general isn't really the strongest now that I mention it. It's not horrible, but sometimes it can be kind of annoying to navigate the equipment or the quest menus. Maybe that's because this used to be a mobile game, but I don't know, I just thought I'd mention it. But back on track. I mean, not really back on track because we're already at the end of the track, but the side quests do have some real gems hidden in them, so if you do decide to play this game, I would recommend maybe looking up which ones are the good ones, because there are some really heart-wrenching moments in here that can bring you a lot closer to a lot of the main party members. So I really just want to mention that. Please do some research and tackle some of these side quests. You will not be disappointed. But now that I talked about each aspect of this game separately, and I mentioned both a lot of positive and negative criticisms, what is the verdict here? Or to answer the question in the title, is FANTASIAN Neo Dimension worthy of your time? Well, as you might have guessed, it's a lot more nuanced than a simple yes or no. In terms of the story, it takes a while to get going, but as the game continues, it slowly but steadily builds on this narrative, these characters and this world, until it turns into something very intriguing. But there's also a shift in focus that you should be aware of. Part 1 can be described as a pretty standard or even casual JRPG. Not in a negative way at all, but it's fun and it feels kind of cozy. The characters, the story, the music, the visuals. Even if it's your first time playing this, even if it's a game from 2021 or a remaster from 2025, this game feels familiar, it feels nostalgic. back. I don't know how to describe this feeling, but the game really just has that nostalgic vibe, that familiar vibe. You feel at home playing Fantasian, talking to these characters, seeing their dynamic. It's a beautiful experience and it's a fantastic feeling. Part 1 honestly strikes that perfect balance in my opinion. It's linear in the way that the story is being told, but it's also very open in the way that you're exploring this world and traversing the overworld, visiting all of these locations. The story might start off quite basic, but at the same time it's very clearly building towards something. Building towards a climax that already comes at the end of part 1 that will leave you craving for more. You're meeting these fun characters and you're connecting to them as they're connecting to each other. The combat also feels familiar in the way that it's very much a classic turn-based game, but it also has that twist, it has that spice, a few fun gimmicks, and the bosses really show the depth of this system. But then you reach part 2, where the game is still very strong, but it definitely shifts the focus and it slowly starts to transform. You'll spend hours on random encounters. One wrong step when you're 20 minutes deep into a boss battle that you played perfectly up to that point, and it's over. Linearity is no more, as every single thing can be done in any order and the entire world is open to you. And while this open nature does rob the game of its party interactions, the characters are still explored to great depths individually, and this new structure gives you so much player freedom, with many optional dungeons and areas, and the customization and party building gets even more in-depth, with new skills, tension skills, and the growth map. Weapons that you used in the early game can now be upgraded to once again be useful. Different weapons have different passives, different movesets. You can really customize your party to your heart's content. And because of this divide in part 1 and 2, this game can be kind of give and take. It almost feels like two different games in a way. Each game, or each part, has its strengths, but it also has its weaknesses, and ultimately it's up to you if this sounds interesting to you or not. Personally, I like both of these type of games, but I personally also don't really think that it works if it's both within one game. The first 25 to 30 hours gave me one experience, an experience that I was greatly enjoying, an experience that was building towards something, an experience that I wanted to continue, but those hours were apparently quite deceiving as the game slowly transforms into something quite different. Of course, some elements stayed consistent and it is all one story, it is all one game, but the shift is a bit of a shame. It feels like the game doesn't really know what it wants to be. Is Fantasian linear or open? Is it challenging and grindy or casual and more laid back? Is it focused on the found family dynamic of these charming characters, or is it a story about the gods and the creation of the world? Both of these design philosophies can work. Both of them can create some fantastic experiences. You can definitely even mix and match some of them, but to me it felt like they struggled to find that balance a lot of the time. And now we have this game that kind of feels at odds with itself. But in saying all of that, it is up to you in the end. Hopefully I gave you some clarity on what Fantasian is and what you can expect from it. And if this sounds interesting to you, then I implore you to check this one out. It has some flaws, yeah, I made sure to mention them, but I'm confident that you will have a fantastic experience if this sounds like something that you would enjoy. And if you're not sure, then I'd say to maybe wait for a sale, because even with my criticisms, I do recommend this game. I don't regret playing Fantasian. I had my issues with it, but in the end, I still really enjoyed this experience, and I can definitely recommend this title to all of you. And I'm not just saying that because I got a review code. As you've heard, I'm definitely not shying away from giving my honest thoughts about my experience. It just has those moments that can make me recommend it regardless. If at any point in this video you thought that Fantasian looks like something that you would be interested in, then yes, go out there and buy it. It has that classic JRPG feel. It had those moments where I was just baffled at the fact that this game was this charming and that it was stuck on Apple Arcade for this long. It has that beautiful OST, that gorgeous visual style. It has that story with an important message that deeply explores its characters, with great world building and super interesting mythology. You can see that the creators were incredibly passionate about this. Fantasian Neo Dimension is a great great game, but it is a great game that comes with some pretty great flaws. Thank you for watching. If you made it up to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. I never thought that I'd reach the point of receiving review codes for games, and I really appreciate this opportunity from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much to Square Enix, but also thank you to you, the viewer. Thanks for liking my videos, thanks for checking out my channel and pressing that subscribe button if you did, and even if you didn't, thank you right now for watching this video. I would never have gotten this far without you guys, without you watching or leaving a like or leaving a comment. I really appreciate all of this. And with that, I'm gonna end this video. This recording is already a lot longer than I wanted it to be. I feel like I say that every video, but you know how it is by now. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, leave a comment with your thoughts on Fantasian, leave a comment with your thoughts on this video, and if you are interested in more content like this, JRPGs and the like, reviews and pre-release discussions and first impressions and all of that stuff, check out my channel, maybe subscribe if you like my content. Don't subscribe if you don't like my content. But with that, thank you so much for watching, I really hope you enjoyed, and I really hope to see you again soon.